A very warm welcome to all of you that are joining us today for this strategic risk webinar in partnership with Swiss Re Corporate Solutions. It's a very busy time of year, so I appreciate your time. And of course, it is a very important topic. Today, we're going to be talking about how risk managers can quantify physical climate change and prepare an action and adaptation plan based upon that data. Joining us today, we have Annemarie Büttner, Lead Climate Risk Solutions at Swiss Re Corporate Solutions, Sarah Gordon, CEO of Satala, and Adrian Clements, President at Adaptation. Sorry, Adrian, did you say something?
No, I'm fine. Please carry on.
To kick us off, I was wondering if we could ask our panelists to give their thoughts on some of the ways in which physical climate change is impacting how we do business today. And Annemarie, can I start with you, please?
Absolutely. So I feel like the climate topic is kind of all omnipresent at the moment, and the wish to understand it is coming up in almost all of our discussions that we have with clients to really get the hard facts together, because they feel like it's impacting them already with transition risks or also with physical risks. For example, the droughts in France that we've experienced this year, also leading to further scrutiny on the energy system, for example, or other events that have taken place. So we really feel like businesses want to get ready because everybody is aware that we haven't seen the tip of the iceberg yet.
Thanks, Annemarie. Sarah?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is something where from a physical aspect, the fact that I think today it is snowing in the UK and Australia, which is fairly unusual for it to be snowing right now, just before the festive season in Australia at the moment. We're seeing the extreme weather events or certain shifting weather patterns really coming to the fore. And exactly as Anne-Marie's already cited, there have been many other examples that we've seen over the past year. But also as well from the sort of the non-physical risks, so those transition risks, all of the regulations, societal expectation, etc., all of that actually really growing teeth and becoming real. So even if you're working in an organization where people don't necessarily believe in, say, the physical aspects of climate change, well, everything else is already here, and of course will be ramping up a lot over the next little while. So certainly massive change in organizations in terms of looking at, okay, well, what is our strategy to address climate change, but then also the broader sustainability aspects, and how do we make sure that this is real, that it's practical, that it delivers true impact rather than just ticking boxes, because we've got no time to tick boxes. We have to jump straight into real impact. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you. Adrian.
Yes, thank you, Helen, for inviting me to this very interesting discussion. So I can only confirm, of course, what Annemarie and Sarah have just said. And the real impacts, I mean, we've seen it in order to be resilient, in order to cope with these changes, these stoppages of production or inability to obtain raw materials from certain places, we're seeing that companies are having to rethink their storage, for example. You know, you need more stock to cope with that. You need alternative suppliers in different parts of the world that are don't have the same footprint, so climately or geocentrically. You're even maybe thinking about having to relocate some of your assets because they're just non-tenable in those situations. So we are seeing massive changes, and part of the consequence, in my opinion, of this forward trend is we're looking for different raw materials. Yeah, so obviously, if I just take the example of batteries, you need much more of the raw materials, which is changing the way we're going to do business. And are we ready to? Are those companies ready for that? Is a very strategic question.
Just to add to anyone who's dialed in, we do want to make this as interactive as possible. So please put your questions forward, and we'll put them to the panelists later on. We did do a survey of our readers earlier this year about how climate change was impacting their business. And one of the interesting things was those that said that they had felt direct impacts from extreme weather, physical climate change, that only about a quarter of them said that they've experienced this directly to their business, which I thought was really interesting. You know, so it kind of suggests that there is this kind of knock-on impact, and we live in such a global interconnected world. You know, it'd be great to get your thoughts on that, and how we can kind of experience these effects, maybe not even directly, but indirectly. Sarah, did you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think this is something here where obviously depending on what our organizations do. So as Adrian was just referring to there, if you're a mining company or somebody like that, there is a high chance that changing weather patterns, access to water, etc., temperature. So again, where you've got average temperatures going up in certain parts of the world, that makes it very difficult as a human being just to turn up to work and walk around outside, and you get increased dust levels, etc. So these are things here where when we're talking about climate change, we're not just talking about emissions. We're talking about all of the other stuff that comes with it as well. And so, yes, for some industries, the direct impacts of that changing climate are very apparent. However, for every other industry that's out there, at some point in your supply chain, either upstream, i.e. where you're getting all of your raw materials, etc., or maybe even your expertise from, or downstream where you're selling your services or whatever they might be onto, somebody is going to be directly impacted by climate change, and it's probably not very far away. And I think this is something where even from a government perspective, so people working in government departments, etc., we're seeing massive changes happening right now with regards to revisions to strategy. So in the US, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is unlocking billions of dollars worth going into many different aspects with regards to, say, raw materials, as Adrian's referring to, which are all needed for the energy transition. We're getting a big shift in global politics, economics, etc. And ultimately, this is actually being driven by climate change and the ticking clock that climate change is applying. So even if we're not personally seeing those physical aspects of climate change impacting on us right now, so we're maybe not working in a low-lying area, so we're not worried about sea level rise, I would make big bets, I'm not a gambling person, that someone somewhere very close to you is going to be impacted. And then even from the transition risks, so the non-physical risks, there is something going on with regards to government policy that will be impacting on you. And it's all being driven ultimately by that ticking clock of climate change. Thanks, Helen.
Adrian, Annemarie, does either of you want to comment?
I find it very very difficult to pin climate change to single events, right? Because basically you can't do that. It's a long-term trend. And for example, did the number of hurricanes increase? You have to look at the whole at the last 30 years. But when you look at, for example, the air condition that the office has been using, and look at the amount of electricity you used up for the last 30 years, is there a trend? I would expect that for many companies there is one, and that already is kind of an impact of climate change on them.
Mm-hmm. And we do have sort of attribution studies now, don't we, where we can kind of look at a particular event. And for example, you said a hurricane, you could say that, there was this increased kind of flooding as a result because of anthropogenic climate change. So we're beginning to be able to unpick that a little bit better than we did in the past, I think. Adrian, did you have any thoughts there?
What I'm seeing is that the traditional ways people were looking at not only their business but their externalities, I honestly believe we need to revisit a lot of what businesses were doing and are doing. And so the analogy I would use is we're trying to put a round peg into a square hole. You know, we've got all this reporting, which is, let's say, traditional. We've got all of these measurements and these KPIs and the business models which we have, which were okay a few years ago. But as I move forwards, and that for me is key, I can't extrapolate what was happening in the past. It's going to become more extreme, like Annemarie said. It's going to be more extreme. It's going to be more, and it's going to be different. And that means that what I'm trying to sell to my clients is I can't use a trending. I have to use futurizing. I have to look at where do I think we will be in 10 years' time, and what Sarah said is perfectly correct. And to be honest, I was doing that almost 10 years ago with the earthquake risk, for example. There's no point in me building my plants to sustain the earthquake if no one comes to work. So in the end of the day, I've got to help the people with better hospitals, better schools, better water supply, better electricity supply, rather than make my plant stronger. Okay, because I can't do anything without the people. And I think this is part of not only the climate change, but it's and my honest opinion is that climate change is a part of the sustainability picture. Okay, and part of that sustainability picture with the social component in it and the ESG, so the social aspect does mean that businesses need to look inside out, outside in, and in an extreme way, almost.
And I suppose as well, when we look at you know, the impact of physical climate change on our business, there's other sort of macro trends that kind of feed into those exposures, aren't there? So there's the whole, you know, urbanization, population growth, you know, the decisions on where to locate certain assets. All of this is sort of part and parcel of these increasing exposures. You can't just kind of look at one thing in isolation, can you? Annemarie, did you want to maybe have a look at that from like an insurance point of view?
Yes, sure. So I feel like there's really a change in mindset of how we did natural catastrophe modeling before, which was of course very backwards looking, like Adrian just said. So we're really changing the game here. We cannot rely on the past anymore. We have to work with reanalysis data. We have to work with future global climate models, and really model for the next years differently. I think the vulnerability and all the parts of it is going to change and need to adapt as well, of course. And I hope to make an impact also in adapting it into a positive direction of increasing resilience and having better building codes, for example. That also help with a sustainability trajectory. So better windows is a small investment, but you'll have less heat and less cold in your building. So also being more sustainable. And these kind of investments, it all feeds in together. And I really hope to also make an impact on the whole vulnerability towards climate events.
Thank you. Other than the kind of the obvious reasons why risk professionals should be concerned about physical climate risk, you know, what are some of the other drivers there? And we haven't yet touched on regulation. I know we're going to come on to that, but why should risk professionals be concerned about this? Maybe we can start with you, Adrian.
There's one thing that shocked me, but I also see this great opportunity out there. So the thing that shocked me is a lot of risk managers, and I'm speaking very generically and generally here, seem to be surprised that ESG is out there and climate change is out there. You know, it seems to be this knee-jerk reaction. Oh my God, I've missed that one. So it gives the impression that the way it was weighted needs to be reviewed. Okay, so you've got this aspect that risk managers are. I was doing it years ago, but other people seem to have missed it. So there's this part of So the risk manager's got this issue of aggregation. There's going to be more of these things. They're going to be bigger and there's going to be more of them. So I've got this aggregation, which is going to hit me. I need to look a little bit more into the future. And actually, I need to look at, as a risk manager, what did my company promise? You know, each company has made a promise to its customers and its suppliers, and that's that purpose. You know, what is it, and am I delivering on that? Which is changing a little bit the view of the risk manager and the scope and the role and responsibility of what that risk manager's job is, because what we've just discussed means the business model risk has to be reviewed. Is my business model fit for purpose? It's fit maybe today, but again, my view is that I'm no longer able to fine tune the old business models. I need a new business model, because fine tuning will only get me to a certain point in the future. And if I'm going to have 10 hurricanes or massive flooding in 10 of my locations, I need to think about that from an insurability viewpoint. And the other thing that I see is, or where it's dangerous for risk managers, that we need to try as hard as we can to find the root cause. There's a lot of symptoms being managed. Yeah, and as we've just said, I can make my factory much more resilient to an earthquake, but if the problem is getting the people to work, then it's a different solution.
Yeah, so it's not just adaptation, it's about action, isn't it? Sarah,
but action where it's adding value.
Yeah, and I mean, I think just to build on what Adrian's just been saying there, Helen, I agree 100%. So I have to say that I quietly chuckle, and I think this is the same for Annemarie and Adrian, when people say, oh, risk managers are suddenly saying that they're key to ESG. Well, no, if you've been doing enterprise risk management in your organization and you haven't been including sustainability or ESG, then you haven't been doing enterprise risk management, because it's one of those core parts of the organization. So it's nothing new to risk management. And actually what risk management brings to the table is exactly as Adrian's been describing. I mean, everything's in a network. So the whole kind of categorization of risks and that sort of fairly, I mean, standard approach to risk management is fine. But we know that the world doesn't work in categories or in buckets. The world works as an interconnected network, as a system, with lots of bits, with big question marks. And so I think where what Adrian is advocating for, and I agree 100%, it's a case here of if we say, okay, well, what's the node that we're looking at the moment? What are the sort of the inputs or the forest of causes that are all linking together to hit on that node? And what are the consequences? Is being able to focus in on all of those different aspects of that network and say, okay, well, I cannot manage all of it, but which bits can I manage? How far upstream in that network can I go? Which if I then change something, we can see then that cascade approach. And that's what we need with something as complicated as climate change. And exactly as Annemarie's been saying, again, whilst the past does give us a huge amount of very valuable knowledge and information, we're dealing with something that is so different to what we've experienced in the past, with immense uncertainty. This, again, is where risk managers are absolutely core, because we don't know what the future holds, but we're experts at kind of putting in place some quite good guesses and then saying, okay, so based on these different scenarios or whatever it is I'm looking at, you know what, if we go and tweak that little thing over there, the net benefit that we're going to get rolling through that network, be it in terms of reducing the potential for threats or bad stuff to happen, or increasing the potential for good things to happen. That's what we're looking for. And then again, as Adrian's saying, the business models of old in many industries, people are having to look for step changes or big revolutions in terms of how those industries actually work, how those businesses work. Because the rules of the game, be it physical rules, which we can't actually do very much about as human beings, or be it the transition rules, which actually, yes, we do hold the pen on what those look like, but they are big and they're macro. How do we play that game? And there's huge opportunity for new businesses, for very different ways of doing business. And I think the exciting thing here is that we're going through this energy transition. It's not just about trying to hit net zero. It's about using it to inform a just transition. So we're rolling in all of those social aspects, all the environmental aspects, all the governance aspects and everything else, all the economics as well, to say, how do we make sure that as we go through this transition, we don't increase the rich-poor divide across the world? We actually say, okay, how can we make sure that when we're building new infrastructure, we're doing it in a way that is right for those different parts of the planet, etc. And there are many different case studies with regards to that. So risk managers actually provide the organized mechanism through which we can achieve positive impact with regards to climate change at the moment. It is nothing new for risk management. Do we need to step up and help people get to grips with some of the big uncertainties that are out there? Absolutely, which is why it's a really exciting time for us at the moment.
And certainly,
and also from the
sorry, carry on, Annemarie.
Sorry. Also from the insurance angle, I feel like also there we're basically want to do the same thing and pick the risk managers up and thinking beyond the 1-year renewal period of a contract, but really thinking about this long-term partnership. Because finding clients is hard work, so we want to keep them for as long as possible, and same way for them. So I really hope that in this also risk management and also insurance business, we start this long-term thinking.
I was just going to say, you know, in terms of what Sarah was saying about stepping up, one of the kind of things that is sort of accelerating our action and attention around the risks and opportunities is, of course, increasing reporting requirements. And we're seeing those become mandatory in certain sectors. You know, can you just give me some thoughts around these regulatory aspects and what that means for risk managers? Anyone want to go first?
If I can, sorry, Sarah, so there's an interesting white paper which is going to be published soon from the BSI, where a comparison was done between the various reporting bodies. Okay, so there are a lot of bodies out there, some more specific to Europe, some more specific to finance, some more specific to certain industries, but there are a lot. They are different. And there's some very interesting research papers out there highlighting the different weights given to certain categories, also the taxonomy that different regulatory bodies are using, and the way that those areas are grouped together. So it is important to report. But one thing which from a sustainability viewpoint, which is key, and having worked for some very large companies in the past, I have to be aware that, yes, I have some cherries out there which are very good and I can report those. For transparency purposes, it's becoming more necessary because of this greenwashing idea that we also say, I've got some other assets out there which, based on their maturity level, are not as good, but we are also working in those areas. So I need to report the good things, but I also need to report the reality, which is based upon the maturity level of some of those assets in some of those countries. Then they are doing the best they can, but they're not at the same level as other areas in my company or my organization. And that's where because different rating or not rating it, well, yeah, rating agencies and regulatory bodies are weighing things differently, and there seems to be a rater bias. Some of the research papers I've been reading recently are also giving a rater bias. So Barrick Gold, which is a big mining company, they actually use those as an example, and they can see one company rated them very good, another one rated them very bad. The difference was incredible, but it's the same company. So I'm a bit worried. I'm a little bit personally concerned that these regulations are great. We need them, but they need to get their act together.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Transparency.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and I think with this as well, sorry, Annemarie, on the ESG rating side, yeah, well, I mean, just let's call it how it is. It's chaos out there at the moment in terms of some of the criteria that's being used to compare and contrast different organizations. So again, in the mining world, there's a large mining company that scores better than another one because they have a more diverse portfolio, but that diversity comes from coal. So it's quite ironic in terms of, you know, how this is done. So you can see that in some industry sectors, yep, things look really, you know, kind of it's done in a very sensible way. In other industry sectors, it's a big question mark. And I think what a lot of organizations are beginning to do is to say, okay, so from an investment perspective, yes, I'll look at ratings, but to be honest, don't place any value on it at the moment. If you're trying to look at whether a company is doing well from a sustainability aspect, actually there's a deeper level of due diligence almost that needs to be done, because we know that the ratings organizations don't have things set up at the moment. Also, from an ESG ratings perspective, there's no regulation. So there's no assurance with regards to the quality of those ratings that are coming through at the moment. It's an industry, I'm sure, from a ratings perspective, that will improve dramatically over the next while. Why? But there's huge money in it. You know, that's why people produce ratings. And I think as well, when it comes to the general reporting side of things, as Adrian was saying, there is a forest of different standards, guidelines, principles, etc., which we can all sign up to, some of which we have to pay for, other ones are free, some of them are mandatory because they're regulated. And it's really difficult to work out, well, how do they actually all fit together? At the end of the day, it is about impact. So if you're looking for, well, which standard, for example, to align to, go and look for the ones that really focus in on where you are making a tangible difference, not where you're writing a standard or ticking boxes, because those ones will come and go, because that's very much greenwashing. Anybody can write a standard on climate change for their organization and leave it on a shelf and never look at it. The difficult bit is putting it in place and seeing if it's actually going to work. So that's something there where I think it's all about taking a step back and saying, well, what's the whole purpose of this? Which ones actually allow me to generate good change? Okay, let's align ourselves with those. Knowing that the likes of TCFD, so the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, which has been mandatory for most large organisations in the UK for almost a year now, and of course is exactly the same, more or less, as what's coming in Europe, in the US, etc., around the world. It is a simple enough structure to allow you as an organisation to then interpret, okay, what do you really want to put into it in terms of those metrics and targets, your strategy for addressing those climate change threats and opportunities, and then ultimately the governance that then is there to hold yourselves to account to say, are we actually delivering on it? So what you find is you can cheat these systems, but if you cheat them now, it's just holding yourselves back for the future, because the future is where people start coming in and saying, I want to check that you really are having the impact that you said or you're saying you're supposed to be having. So that's where we're going. So it's all very sensible. It's just a bit messy at the moment, and it's very easy for people round about us to cheat, but they're going to come a cropper in the future. I say optimistically.
Thank you. Annemarie, tell me about some of the work that Swiss Re Corporate Solutions is doing with its clients on, you know, certain reporting requirements such as TCFD.
Sure. So to complement on what Sarah just said, even the World Championship gave itself a great sustainability rating, which they just made up themselves. So yes, you can cheat the system. And I feel like it's all about being transparent about the methodology. So as long as the rating is a black box, it's not that helpful, right? Yes, so we do support our clients also on reporting. EU taxonomy is a huge topic at the moment, because in the annex of the EU taxonomy you also need to report on specific physical climate risks, and just tick the boxes of am I at risk, when am I going to be at risk, when is the tipping point of it being unmanageable. But I really hope that our customers use the EU taxonomy and these reporting requirements beyond being a tick box exercise. So I really hope that this is creating momentum in the whole resilience movement. And this is the part that is important to me, that the whole risk adaptation and risk management will come as a result out of this first step of understanding and reporting your risks.
Because of course there are, huge opportunities as well as risks to consider, aren't there?
Sure. Yes, there is. Being best in class is, I think one great opportunity at the moment, and really also an opportunity to stick out of the market, and also being prepared when others struggle, and being prepared for. And then getting lower insurance ratings, for example, it can be a great advantage as a company in the future.
You mentioned tipping points there, and the IPCC has come out with its sort of different scenarios depending on how quickly as society we can adapt to net zero. Under those differing scenarios, what should companies be thinking about? Particularly when you look at some of the more extreme scenarios, if we're not able to get to grips with this as quickly as we should.
So our customers are using, have very themselves already opinions about the scenarios, which I find super interesting. Some of them think SSP5 is completely unrealistic. Some of them think SSP1, we're way past that. So I really enjoy that customers already make up their mind and use the different scenarios to play with the future.
I think with that as well, Helen, it's a case where it's not necessarily about when we're going to hit various tipping points from a physical perspective, etc. So this isn't risk management about when will something happen in the future. It's actually, we've got to flip it and say, well, no, if we think that might happen in the future, and we've got a whole variety of different scenarios that are there at the moment, and of course every year things get more and more scary because we realize that we're following the worst possible scenario that we've modeled, and you think, well, hang on, we need to model some even more scary ones. But actually, that's one part, and that's really important for us to understand. But more importantly, it's about working backwards and saying, well, okay, so if that's what the future might hold, when do we need to start doing something about it? So really, it's all more about the tipping point of putting the action in place and seeing that change. Because if we wait to see if the science is correct, we're totally scuppered. This is not something where we can wait and get lots and lots of lovely data sets and be really confident in what we think the future holds. This is actually all about taking a deep breath, putting in place a whole load of different actions, knowing that a bundle of them aren't going to work. We're going to waste loads of money. So that's where we also need to be rolling in things like the environmental benefits, so the environmental capital, the social capital. So what are all of the other pros that we get with taking those actions and making those changes? Because if we wait to see if the risk impact and the whole likelihood aspect of all of it is correct, we are past the tipping point for when we needed to take action. So this is about making change and doing it really quite quickly.
And of course, there's some really interesting discussions about biodiversity going on at the moment in Montreal. And, I think, that is all part and parcel of this, isn't it?
Oh, Helen, Helen, so I was in a discussion last week with a guy in Canada, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, and there seems to be this idea of ecosystem risk management, which is doing risk management, but in a slightly bigger scope. So including the ecosystem in a much more detailed way. But if I can just so the business model that I'm selling as Atypic, and Sarah described it very well. I don't know why, but I have this idea of futurizing. Okay, so that's looking, where do we need to be as a company? And then I backcast and I identify the milestones I need to have in place and the timing that I need to have those. It's the exact opposite of forecasting. Okay, this is backcasting. Okay, then if I'm a company, I need to look at my current footprint. Yeah, where am I in the world? What is happening out there? And then I need to do my fingerprint, which is which areas of sustainability or the environmental area do I need to look at in each of those locations where I am? Because obviously, if I'm in North Canada, I've got permafrost issues. If I'm in Australia, I've maybe got wildfires and bushfire issues. So I need not only to look at where do I need to be in the milestones, but I need an action plan for each of my facilities to see, or to based on their maturity, to say, okay, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to do something else. And that's this footprint definition, or this footprint view, and then the fingerprint that each footprint is creating. Where am I touching? And like Sarah said, I can't do everything, but there are some key things, maybe top 3 things that I can do. Yeah, and it might be water, it might be CO2, it might be methane, because let's be honest, climate change is looking a lot at CO2, but in fact, we used to report in my previous companies 14 different elements, dust and CO2 and methane and PCBs and that's where the forecasting helps, because if I start with CO2 and then I progress, methane is coming, right? And then there will be NOx, okay? And then there'll be something else coming. So rather than be reactionary, I need to lead, which means I need to look in the future and say what will come. And as part of that, I will automatically correct or align with the different temperature gradings or the different world scenarios that are out there. Yeah, I'd rather lead it rather than follow it.
Yeah. And it does very much depend, doesn't it, on what industry sector you're operating in, and as you say, what the footprint is of your organisation, and maybe what are the things you can do around sustainability that you might already be doing, I guess. Shall we take a couple of questions from those who've dialed in? And there's one from Stefan Martin here. Hi, Stefan. And he's looking for a view on the way that supply chains will need to reorganise themselves linked to water scarcity, such as in the food and agriculture industry, and have these discussions already taken place at executive levels in their strategic developments? Does anybody want to have a go at giving some thoughts to that one?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess just to bring a little bit of laughter into the room, Helen. So I had a call earlier on today with some of the members of my team, and we were all talking about, okay, so let's just have a little bit of a think of, well, what is the carbon footprint of our own festive season? And so let's think about Christmas dinner. So many of us will be celebrating Christmas over the next few weeks. And that's something there where apparently, okay, and I stand to be corrected on these statistics, the carbon emissions from all UK Christmas dinners is equivalent to a car driving around the world 6,000 times. Okay, so that's so that's what apparently we're going to use now. I'm personally terrible at cooking, so I'm not sure if that actually also includes the carbon crust that will be appearing on my turkey. But I think even just from a cooking perspective, when you're thinking about that, and then thinking, okay, and we've got members of the team who are vegan, and so if you use if you are eating a vegan Christmas dinner or lunch, then actually that's going to have 50% fewer emissions. Again, just looking at the statistics. But then think about what then happens after. Apparently, over the Christmas period, we throw away 230,000 tons of food, which is the equivalent, that's as heavy as the Empire State Building. So you can visualize how much additional food gets thrown away at this time of year, just because we're all being fairly excessive and greedy and whatever the case might be. So I know that's not exactly what Stefan was perhaps asking, but from a very personal perspective, it's actually thinking, okay, well, actually, where do I as a consumer buy all of my material, etc. from? What do I do with it? And we can see immediately there are things that every single one of us can do. If you then escalate that up into a company or an organization where you've got probably much larger buying power, personally, I've seen a lot of events, for example, recently, where when you get given food at lunchtime, it might all be vegan. So I was at one recently. I'm personally a geologist, so I was there with all of the other geos, and we were like, "Oh, great! You know, this looks like really nice food." But we're still walking along, and we got to the end of the table, and we were like, "Oh, well, where's the meat?" And then we all went back to the beginning again. But it was great because actually, and that was at the Institute of Physics, where as an organization, they've said, well, actually, no, we've gone away, we've thought about it. And whenever we run an event, we are either going to basically force food on people, which we know everybody can eat, but we take things like meat and whatever else that might have a more difficult footprint off the table. So I thought that's very interesting from an industry perspective, just little things that you can do. And I'm sure Adrian and Annemarie have got something to say about the broader supply chain. So I'll hand over to you guys.
Yes, so supply chain and water scarcity is one of the most frequent questions that customers actually have. And especially in the agriculture space, people are searching for different suppliers. I recently had a discussion, long-term discussion, and a little analysis about vanilla currently being the best quality in Madagascar, and Madagascar are going to experience significantly more droughts. So where to source our vanilla from in the future to create a substitute, but we really want that high quality vanilla that we can only get there. So companies are searching for alternatives because I want to enjoy my vanilla yogurt in the future too. And it is a huge topic. We need to have the assessments, and we need to probably also make the way we farm more resilient, for example, by combining different plants, coffee and palm trees, for example, so the coffee doesn't get burned as it cannot stay too much heat. Changing, for example, the kind of coffee that we are going to consume in the future. For example, Robusta is more robust, as the name says, than, for example, Arabica. So there's a lot of ideas out there on how to work with that, but the supply chains and the way we source products is going to change, I'm sure.
So one of the big discussions that I've been listening to recently was the value add of a risk manager will be in the agility area. Okay, because companies need to be agile. So if I just take a couple of steps back, there's risks too. If we take vanilla, for example, in Madagascar, there's an enormous risk to vanilla coming from Madagascar, but therefore there's a great opportunity for another company in another country to make vanilla. Yeah. So the question is, if I now look at my company's footprint and I've decided that my future is in food and it's in vanilla, then is my footprint okay for the future climate that I envisage? And it might mean that I have to relocate, which then has, of course, social aspects, because maybe I need to close a plant in one country and open another one in another area. That's why I don't believe that ESG is the single discussion we should be having. We should be discussing sustainability in its entirety, because it's a balance. I will have to balance, do I close that plant in Madagascar because I can't grow vanilla anymore? Or do I try to cope with that? Or do I actually relocate to another country and create jobs in that other country where the climate is perfect for vanilla growing now or in the future? So part of the value proposition of a risk manager is to help with that agility, I believe helping boards and C-suite identify, okay, that's our current footprint. the future footprint will look like this. The fingerprint of that footprint will look like this in those countries. Therefore, I need to do some M&A or do some more opportunistic viewing, because it could be that it's cheaper to do that than it is to mitigate the risk of droughts in Madagascar, which is a shame but then Madagascar also needs to identify its opportunities, for example. And we saw that, I'll be honest, we saw that in countries like Andorra, like Guernsey, like Jersey, like Luxembourg, with the tax issues. Yeah, we saw some countries which were tax havens having to change their entire business model when the financing world changed. So it is possible. Yeah.
And that was something certainly a month ago when we did our climate change and ESG forum with the Institute for Risk Management, that was discussed a little bit, you know, this kind of issue around unintended consequences. So you might decide to adapt your business because of physical climate risk, but then it could have then social consequences or something like that. So these are all things that I guess as risk professionals need to be considered. Sarah?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with you there, Helen, because I mean, I think this is something where as risk managers, we are experts in being able to actually manage things that are conflicting with one another. And so it's a case there of actually recognizing where, okay, fine, you could reduce the carbon footprint, but that's going to negatively impact on a local community, for example, or whatever the case might be. And so it's about being able to look at this and balance things and say, okay, at this current point in time, what do we think the right decision is? And I think that all then comes into the whole adaptation plans that everybody's preparing, or we call them transition pathways or sustainability strategies, or whatever it is that you want to call them. It is not unusual, and actually it is encouraged for people to restate those plans and restate those metrics and targets. Just because you said last year, oh yes, we're going to be net zero by 2027, and you've gone away and you've looked a bit more at the data and you've looked a bit more at where we think the future's going, and you said, oh bother, I can't buy those electric vehicles that I was relying on to decarbonize my fleet. What are we going to do? Do I stick with my whole net zero by 2027, or do I actually come out and say, look, we've gone away, we've done, we've thought about it a bit more, we've had to change our plan because there's a whole load of external factors going on in the world that we can't control. So we're going to have to change things up. And here are our new metrics and targets. So actually restating, but provided you back that up with a very clear justification for why you are changing those targets and why you are improving your plan, that's what's important there. Some organizations think, oh no, I've locked myself into X, but that might no longer be possible. So, and if you then carry on stating that's what you're going to do, and you know that you've got no intention of doing it, that right there is greenwashing. So actually come clean and say, okay, how do we make sure that we do keep that constant dialogue going with all of our different stakeholders so that they know where it is we're going with that.
And of course, the data and our scientific understanding is evolving all the time.
Yeah.
So I guess we need to make decisions based on the most up-to-date insights that we have at any given point in time. If I may, I'm going to come to some of the questions that we've got from our viewers, and then maybe we can move on just to finish by looking at the role of insurance. So we have a question from Daniel Roberts here. Hi, Daniel. Where he's saying it seems that we've got three levels of consideration and preparation. We've got the personal side, our families, homes, ourselves; the company side, impacts on our companies, our products, our customers; and then the kind of the broader social aspects and the obligation of government to address the core drivers of climate change. And his question is, what are the key decision packages that each should be considering? So this is quite a big question, but it'd be great to get some thoughts from you guys.
Actually, when coming to the conference, I combined the first and the second, so the personal and the company one. So at Risk we got CO2 budgets for every team. And when we travel, of course, CO2 budget gets used up. So I came by train to London from Zurich, and it was a fantastic experience. I would always do that again, because you change in Paris, meet a friend there, have a coffee, and then you go on. with a Eurostar. Fantastic. I think the first one, so the personal one, there's a lot happening also on people changing their behaviors, different products showing up in the supermarket all the time. And this is something that takes time. As companies, we can work more punctual, so we can work more like a spear that we put into the wasp's nest. And I feel like there's also really the will to change now, and we could see that sustainable products also simply sell better. So there's a lot of reasons to go there. Regarding the social obligations, I probably let my colleagues answer on that one, but I feel like combining the first two is also rather important, not to forget the people and force it onto the people that work at the company, but really to make it a common effort.
I think, and I'm going to follow up on this discussion I had with Daniel very recently, actually, because it was a question of value. I have my personal values, okay, which are, let's say, I want to be green. But then I enter my company, and my company is, I've got shareholders. The value for the shareholder is, I'm going to be very devil's advocate here, profit, profit, profit. Okay, so those two things are maybe conflicting. They shouldn't be, but they will be, because the value for me, my family, my friends, my personal environment versus the company value, and then versus the stakeholder value. Those three things are sometimes not aligned. And I think that's where we are going to have some issues, or I hope some developments, some very innovative developments in the future on how do we value adequately, maybe not correctly, but adequately, climate, social, sustainability versus money now, because obviously we need to make a profit. Okay, that's one of the goals, but does it have to be that big? Maybe I can survive with a slightly less profit. And this is where, certainly in the future, the way I'm looking at a lot of companies is how much are they spending in R&D to align a little bit the company and the personal, because that, I need to develop things, products which are okay, and that R&D investment is future value creation for society as well as maybe the personal side.
I think as well, just quickly building on that, in terms of I like Daniel's three different sort of buckets that have been outlined there. It depends how you want to approach them. It's almost like you need to do stakeholder mapping. So when you say, okay, who are all these different people and the different perspectives that they've got? And Adrian, I totally agree with what you're saying there. So invariably, shareholders want to see profit coming out of an organization, but actually for that organization to attract and retain the talent that they need in order to do what they need, actually many younger people who are coming through at the moment are expecting an organization not to be solely focused on financial profit, and they're expecting more of a triple bottom line approach, so bringing in the natural and the social capital as well. The problem being, of course, that our economic system that we all work in at the moment is predominantly on the financial side, and we haven't seen that shift into donut economics, etc., all of those theories that are there. But the big driver that certainly I see a lot of at the moment is around that attraction and the retention of talent, because people want to work for organizations that they are proud of and I think are actually making a difference in the world. So you'll see some of the organizations that are just focused on profit begin to break because they just won't have the people inside them to drive all of that. So I think it's a case of, yes, you need to be thinking very empathetically, putting yourself in the shoes and socks of all of those different people to then say, okay, well, what does this mean for you? Where's the benefit for you? And so therefore, how can we instigate that change? And ultimately, because we as people, we're the ones that make up companies and we're the ones that make up society as well. So it's all interconnected.
And I guess it's sort of part of this broader shift towards sort of more stakeholder capitalism that we're seeing. And I think Laurie Bowman's question kind of touches on this, and how do we assign values to kind of the more kind of short-term goals versus longer term? It's a really interesting question. It's quite long, so I'm just going to shorten it if I can. It's talking about sort of social discount rates, and small changes in the discount rate have a major influence on whether project passes or fails a cost-benefit test. And when the discount rate is too high, projects with short-term benefits appear more attractive. And there's an example there about Australia. So how can global reforms be made public sector discount rates in Western countries so that benefits for future generations are not being overly discounted? So that was a really interesting question.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic question. And the fact is, if people are still making decisions based on discount rates or even methodologies from 1989, that's just not fit for purpose. I mean, that is so out of date now, and society has changed a lot since then. And the problem is that where perhaps, well, hands are tied by, be it regulations or whatever, that are out of date or are not fit for purpose, it means that people then start putting in place workarounds and they start cheating, even if it's cheating with the best thing in mind. So yeah, again, I mean, Adrian, I'm sure you will agree with me on this. From a mining project perspective, where people use just normal net present value and hurdle rates within there to decide whether they go ahead with the project or not. We've known forever that that was the wrong tool to use. And the only people who use it are the accountants, who don't necessarily understand the technical aspects of what's going on. So this, again, is where we actually need to get very sensible and say, well, no, what are we actually trying to drive here? What are the right kind of hurdles or mechanisms that we put in place to help us make those decisions? Because some things are no longer fit for purpose, and some things actually aren't the right things to use for something like ESG. The final thing I'll say here is using your stereotypical impact against likelihood. Likelihood is a nightmare for climate change risks. It doesn't work very well, or it prioritizes things in a really strange way that's not helpful. And so what you see a lot of organizations do is ditch the whole likelihood access and use something else that's a bit more useful. So again, it might be in things like social discount rates, or it might be on practical tools that we use within risk management. You don't have to have your hands tied to the traditional ways of doing things. Sometimes we need to use different, more all-encompassing techniques that actually provide us with the more sensible answers. Great question, though.
Yeah, so I did a test just a couple of weeks ago of saying, okay, I need to reach this climate goal in 2050. What is the value today? And the answer was, well, I won't do it. Okay, the answer was clear, I won't do it. And if you look at the WEF, so the World Economic Forum's results, and you see the COP27 and COP26, you see it very clearly. A lot of companies are just not doing anything now. They think they have time. And this is where we need to say, we need to have a slightly different rethink on how do I show the future value of something so that it actually becomes very important today. And I realize I'm starting very late, you know, because it's going to take a number of years to get there with new technology. And that's where bringing in the insurance view, there's going to be a whole load of prototypes coming in. There's going to be a whole load of innovation taking place, and a lot of those things, like Sarah said, they won't work, but there'll be a lot of failures. But you've got to try. We've seen it in the mining sector. We've seen it in the steel sector. We've seen it in the food sector. You try things, and that's where the R&D investment is key. Which companies are investing? Which companies are researching? How do I show that value? And that's where the weighting system of risk management. Traditionally, we will have finance, operations, strategic, and a couple of others. No, because that overweights, overcompensates some things. And if I'm looking at 2050 or 2040, there are many companies which are saying, I can only look at the next 2 years. As Sarah knows, mining companies have been looking at the last 20, 30 years because it's a lifetime, and you've got to close it out at the end. For infinity, it's not a case of it's stopped, it's infinity. You've got to keep those tailing ponds out there. So there's got to be a rethink or a readjustment of discounted cash flow or WACC or all of these things in order to put the value, this sustainability value, on today's agenda.
I'm wary of time, and we need to wrap up, I'm afraid. I'd quite happily carry on talking about this. It's absolutely fascinating. If we can finish with you, Annemarie, and Adrian mentioned the role of insurance there. It'd be great to get some parting thoughts from you on how the insurance industry can support some of these changes that need to happen.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you, Helen and Strategic Risk, for hosting this. I think on behalf of all speakers, very, very big thank you from us. Yes, so I feel like the insurance industry has a critical role to play because we want to look into the future, and we got the models that can help clients to understand physical climate risks. So really the natural catastrophe models, adapting them with some future impacts. And yeah, I hope that the clients really focus on that and then develop their own risk mitigation strategy or climate change strategy to be future resilient. But as we've very enthusiastically discussed also today, the first priority for all of us is going to be to reduce our emissions. We're not yet there where it's all about adaptation, so we can still change the game. And I think this should be our first priority. And then 2050, we can fully focus on how to survive this. Thank you.
Sarah, Adrian, Annemarie, thank you all so much indeed for your time and insight today. Much appreciated. And thank you to everyone who joined us. We'll be sharing this on YouTube in case any of you missed it, so they'll be able to catch up then. But thank you all so much indeed. And if I don't speak to you before, have a lovely Christmas.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.